I'm sure many of you have heard of the Bridgewater Triangle and Freetown State Forest. If you haven't, think of the Bermuda Triangle, but in southeastern Massachusetts, spanning over several towns. Science says that all over the world, there are these specific points that seem to emanate this extra amount of magnetic force. Legends, however, say that the Bridgewater Triangle came about because of a curse put on the land by a Native American Wampanoag chief, whose people were decimated by murder, disease, famine, and religion that came with the white men. With the curse, it became a hotbed for a myriad of legends, from cryptid monsters like the Thunderbird, giant snakes, and the Rake, to haunted roads, ghost tribes, spirits of the damned, and lost travelers. Oh yeah, and allegedly Wendigo spirits looking to claim the souls of any who wander too far. What is not an allegation, though, is the confirmed occult activity that was rampant in the early 70s and 90s. Out-of-place stone structures were found built into the earth, and one of them even had a body of a young 17-year-old girl who had been dead for at least 10 years. The strangest thing, though, was that she was sealed in there from the inside. Investigators and forensic analysts didn't have the slightest clue as to how anyone could do that. Some of the masonry work looked as if it had come straight from a mason's hands. Since then, however, people claim to see all sorts of things in that place, and frankly, I don't care if you believe me. I just want to tell this story. To make matters shorter, I'll get right to it. My interest in hunting came from my dad, but we never actually got to do it. He passed away a few years ago, and in his honor, I got a hunting license. Now I could bag all the 10-point bucks in New England. Or so I thought. I decided on my first expedition to be in Freetown State Forest, since it was so close to where I grew up. I'm from the city next to Freetown called New Bedford, so this made it a lot easier for me to plan this out. I took one day to scout out some locations, put a couple trail cams up, and visit the site of the last Native American chieftain and his tribe. Profile Rock was what it was called, I think. Some people say when the sun is going down, and it hits that point where the trees are no longer showered in that golden love, that you can see him sitting on the rock and hear the drumming of his people get louder and louder until it sounds like it's in your head. I got to the forest parking lot right when it opened and talked to the ranger on duty at the station. I told him I was planning a hunting trip, and he looked oddly surprised. I figured this would have been a common occurrence, but he leaned in and said, "You want to go hunting in there? For what? There's nothing but myths, moths, and spiders. What do you expect to kill?" No, it's alright, don't tell me. I do have to warn you about this, though, young man. 6 weeks ago, almost to the day, a father and his 2 sons were in these woods hunting. They had gone away off the path and into the wetlands in the eastern side. The 2 boys hiked 5 miles to the ranger station and waited 8 hours for me to show up. The younger boy explained what happened, but the older one had something different about him. It was like he wasn't there and he was just part of the background. He didn't take his eyes off his brother while he spoke. The young one, I think named Scott, had told me that something grabbed his dad and ran off with him, while his older brother had stopped to relieve himself. A couple hours later, they had come across an old cemetery and made a fire, but someone or something didn't like it. Scott said they saw something. It was like a man with a long neck, like a snake. It was slithering around their campsite. The boys huddled together, and this thing got behind them and put its face up against his older brother. And then somehow in an instant, the snake man began to swallow his brother whole, until Scott threw a burning log onto the thing's neck. It screeched like crazy, and there have been local reports of coyote activity to cover it up. Before it retreated back into the woods, this thing apparently blew the campfire out like a candle. Now I know it all seems quite far-fetched, but do not be fooled. This place has many legends and secrets. He held his hand out for a shake and his business card. He also handed me a map and a small radio that was tuned to the ranger station. "If you run into anything, and I mean anything, you need to let me know." I said okay, and was off on my way. I studied the map carefully, and decided to just start on the main trail of Whitetail Loop. This trail pretty much covered the span of the park, with the exception of a few smaller trails that led into the wetlands. That was the place I didn't want to be in, since that's where the two boys said their snake man was. It was only 7 a.m. when I began my trek through the woods, and I immediately felt something was seriously off. I had this strange sensation that something was following me, step by step. Every time I took a step forward, I heard a footfall, and then another step behind me, like it was mimicking me. I whipped around and pulled out the Beretta my dad gave me from when he was in the Navy. No one was there. Nothing. Just the trees swaying in the slight cool breeze of the late fall morning. The beauty of Mother Nature's voice and figure. The birds singing their songs, the slight crunching of leaves of small woodland critters scurrying around the ground, and the warm glow of her radiant smile. I hadn't completely forgotten why I was there in the first place. I knew it was to hunt, but I realized I wasn't here to kill a buck. I was here to be baptized by nature. I was loving it. Was is the key word here. I stopped walking down the path because I noticed that sound of echoing footsteps. But this time, instead of being behind me, they were in front of me. I saw at first what looked like a man crawling on all fours. I got closer and it got farther, but I tried to take a single step backwards, and it stretched out its body and came right up to my face. It was not a man. It wasn't even human. At the end of its limbs were feet that had too many toes. It had this strange pitch black face, with its lips curled back into a gleaming smile. Its teeth were perfect, as if they were dentures, and they were big. Each tooth was roughly the size of a $50 coin. It opened its mouth, and a yellow liquid leaked out and hit the ground. It started to trace patterns into the dirt. After the liquid dissolved, I saw the patterns were actually words. It read, "No turning back. I will guard you. Be not afraid of me. This is one of many forms. I will help you get out of this hell." After I finished reading the message, I looked up and it was gone. In its place, it left a magazine of ammo that fit my pistol perfectly, a map with the names of all the creatures and their homes, an old handheld FM radio, and a pocket knife. Why leave me all this stuff, I wondered. How can I trust it? I mulled it over for a minute or two and decided to just go with it. Something in me told me I would regret it if I didn't take the help. Continuing down the path, I saw the old fire barn the ranger told me about, but it had looked abandoned for quite some time. It was sitting on stilts, and underneath it was old logs of wood ready for the fire. What threw me off was that the logs looked as if they were freshly chopped. Little to no dirt on them, and what fresh cedar and cherry wood smell. Just for kicks, I walked up the steps and knocked on the door, and said, "Hello? Anyone home?" I giggled to myself, not expecting a response, when I heard something knock back. However, it wasn't coming from the door. The knocking continued in threes, getting faster, and faster, and faster, then becoming more irregular. I lost it when I saw that thing. I made the fight or flight decision of flight, and ran into the fire barn. The door swung open with relative ease, and I slammed it shut behind me. The noise had stopped, and I examined my surroundings. On the wall were paintings of certain parts of the forest in the old attic, and it also showed a ranger cabin from over 80 years ago. I turned on the old handheld radio and flipped through the static. I found a station, however, that came clear as day. It was a weather report, but after every forecast, followed a cryptic message. "The spirits will rise. The guardian cannot help you. Your soul shall be lost." Then a sharp ringing of feedback pierced the many distorted voices' warnings. I took about 15 minutes of rest to get my bearings and plot my next trek. However, I noticed something I didn't before. The fire barn is nowhere near where I started, and is miles from where I thought I was. This revelation hit me so hard, I didn't even notice the figure standing in the window. Solid pitch black humanoid, at least 6'6". I cocked my pistol and I'm ready to shoot, but my hands couldn't stop shaking. I wasn't sure if I'd hit it or not. After much careful consideration, I decided to confront the intruder. I kept my pistol trained on the window and made for the door. My hand hit the knob, and on the imaginary count of 3, I ripped it open and rushed outside. Whatever it was had left me. I relaxed for a second, and then my fear and anxiety hit the roof as I saw the bright fall morning somehow become the darkest of nights. There weren't any sounds coming from the woods. All I could feel were the eyes of wandering souls watching me enter their world. Gun shaking in my hands, I pulled out my flashlight and began to make my way back onto the trail. I continued my march with extreme caution, careful not to trip on any rocks or roots. I was hearing the footsteps again and felt relieved that the Guardian was back. I took a deep exhale and turned around to greet it. What was standing there threw my mind for a loop. It was a man dressed in regular street clothes, all except for a neck stretched out so far above the trees, his head disappeared into the dark treetops. I was paralyzed in awesome fear, not because of the neck, but because I could feel something breathing on my ear, and jaws gently and slowly clamping down on my neck. A high-pitched shriek came from far off in the distance, as it came from a small child or woman. The creature disengaged its teethy grasp, and quicker than I could blink, it slithered off into the direction of the scream. Something in me told me to run after it. What if someone was hurt? I had to do something. I sprinted as fast as I could until my light caught time, and without moving its mouth, it said, "It is a trap. It saw your heart. It knows you'll help." Heeding the earlier message of listening to the Guardian, I lowered my weapon, and it pointed me back into the direction of the trail. It started walking with me, and it began to tell a story. "I used to be a man, a long time ago. I protected these woods. People came and killed my family. They sacrificed my children, damned my soul to this body. Hard to remember, getting harder. Soon I will be mindless. Soul still here. Mind will be gone. Dangerous I'll be. Men bathed in black. Worship monsters, but still only men. They do not age. Still only men. You end them. My soul free. You go free." I could barely see the Guardian without the flashlight trained on it. His pitch black body made him almost invisible. I noticed a change through this time. Instead of having all feet, he now has 2 hands. No fingers, just mittens. I heard the crunching of twigs behind me. I pull my gun back and whip around ready to unload. It was just a deer. 10 points, just like the one I wanted right there. It was staring at me, totally blinded from the flashlight, and then I saw it charge. The longer I stared at it, the more I could see it morph into something completely different. It shed its fur to reveal a pink, veiny skin that glistened in the light. The eyes fell from their sockets to reveal 2 large gaping holes where the tiniest white light was. Its snout just fell off, and all that was left was its bare skin. It stood up on 2 legs and outstretched its arms to the side, showing me its long arms and fingers with nails so razor sharp. I just looked at them, and it made me feel like I was already bleeding. It stared at me and looked into the deepest recesses of my soul. The creature began to walk towards me in a brisk pace, as if my gun wouldn't make a difference. It stopped 3 feet away from me and cocked its head to the side. The light in my hand was shaking furiously, and before I could do or say anything, the Guardian tackled the creature and ripped its permanent smile off its face. In that split second of action, like a slow-motion scene in a movie, I saw a second pair of teeth protrude out, but they looked like shark teeth. just rows and rows, clamping down like a vice on the monster's neck. It let out a shriek. I heard earlier that drew the snake. The guardian was different though. It had sounded exactly like a man. I heard my name called behind me, and standing there was a black-robed man holding a large knife. The commotion had drawn out another spirit, but this one the guardian was afraid of. He charged at the guardian, and it just stood there waiting for the blade to plunge through its heart. I remembered the phrase still, just a man, from moments earlier, and pulled the trigger, until the mysterious man fell lifeless to the ground. I looked at the guardian, but he was gone. I was alone again. I removed his robe and inspected my shooting. I didn't even register that I just killed someone. Nothing clicked in me at all, just stone-faced looking at him. This guy had tattoos all over him in black ink. Some were brands from an iron, and some were carved into him down to the bone. I had to come to the conclusion that this guy was ready to die, and somehow knew he was going to. Despite the hold-up, I started down my path again, ready for anything now. I pretty much forgot about the radio the ranger had given me earlier that morning. I took it out of my bag and gave a quick holler over the static. "Hello? This is Matt. I checked in earlier at the ranger with Steve and Armel. Is anyone receiving me?" I let go of the talk button and listened. Dead silence. I tried a couple more times until I heard a broken voice come through. "This is Ranger Armel. What? Have you? 3 days." I was in absolute shock. Did he say I've been out here for 3 days? "Hello, please report your last, over. It's Ranger. You've been gone for 3 days. What? Location?" For some reason I found it to be more of a mindfuck. I had been here for 3 whole days. I radioed back. "I'm on the east side near the fire barn. I need help." The radio went silent for a moment. Then the ranger came back on and told me to go north. There was apparently another ranger out looking for me in that area. I also heard something about Profile Rock, but couldn't make it out. I didn't know if I wanted to go there. I found another trail that was connected to the main loop heading north. The only problem with this trail though was that it went right through Profile Rock. My brain battled with itself to figure out if I should head there or not. I was torn. Something in me wanted to go as if I knew there would be someone waiting for me. But what if there wasn't? What if the only thing there were more robed men? Screw it. I made up my mind and headed the trail towards the rock. There was a small pond not even 10 feet from the rock that was fed by an underwater spring, which a lot of people believe is the source of all this. This time I was ready for what was to come next. I moved along the path slow and smooth, being sure not to be caught off guard by whatever wanted to try me. I came to a clearing in the woods so big, I didn't even know it was on the map. Out of nowhere, I heard a screech that was like nails on a chalkboard. The sky opened up and began to pour buckets. Thunder boomed right over my head and cracks of lightning broke the sky. In the few flashes that seemed to last an eternity, the outline of a giant bird tattooed the sky. It circled above me, and every time its wings flapped, I could feel the rush of air from the claps of thunder. While standing in awe of the mythical thunderbird, something in my gut told me that I was being stalked. I turned around and saw 5 tall silhouettes moving towards me, crouched and cautious. Cracks of lightning lit up the scene around me. More of those tall, pale creatures were surrounding me, and I could see more moving through the woods behind them. I sprinted down the trail towards the rock, and when the rain stopped and drums started playing in the distance, I ran towards the sound of them, trying to shake my pursuers. Weaving in and out of the trees, I could hear them and feel them right on my heels. I dug deeper and ran so hard my lungs felt as if they just caught fire. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see something trying to match my speed on all fours. The guardian had found me again, and was a couple steps behind me but keeping pace. However, this time something was off about him. He was weaving back and forth behind me as if to confuse the creatures chasing us. Faster than I could blink, he stopped and stood there. I turned around and stopped to look at it. It looked back at me and let out a roar unlike anything I've ever heard and started fighting the creatures. I ran back and fired off a few shots into the horde. Only a couple fell, but more were coming. It turned around and screamed, "Go! Follow the voices!" I stood in awe as the protector that helped me so much was brought down to one knee. Still fighting back, he ripped two of the creatures in half the long way and started beating the others with an arm he tore off. Feeling helpless, I just ran towards the direction the drums were coming from. I hit a path with a different feel to it. The path was all sand and rocks, so I knew I was on the right way to Profile Rock. I came around a bend and saw someone standing in the path. I stopped and raised my gun at them. "Who are you? I'll shoot!" Right as I was about to pull the trigger, I heard footsteps behind me. It was the Guardian, standing there like a bleeding statue. I could see all the damage done. It was missing an arm and chunks of its right leg were missing. It still kept its ghoulish yet comforting grin. I heard a voice say, "Come," and the figure standing in front of us raised its hand into a fist, and when I blinked it was gone, as if it wasn't even there. Silently the Guardian hung its head and limped along. I walked up behind it and put a good arm around my neck. It supported the main gold leg next to it. "Why?" it asked me. "Because you've saved my life." I should be asking you why. I know for a fact you're not allowed to protect everyone. All these things here, these lost souls are beyond saving. You know it, and so do I. I just don't understand why you have been lost to it yet. It looked at me, and even though its everlasting smile, I could see the disapproval in my answer. "I help who is worthy. You came to hunt, not to hurt. This place is for those who hurt." A door was opened. You walked through it. Not all here are lost. Some need to be found. I protect those who are meant to be found. Silence and moonlight were our best friends as we trekked down the path. Every now and then I could hear voices in front of us, always just a little out of earshot. About 30 minutes went by until the Guardian asked to stop. It looked at me and said, "Thank you. The final steps are yours. I cannot come. I can no longer protect you. I have no friends here, only you, but you cannot stay. Not safe." It put a hand on my shoulder, and for a brief second, I could see past the pitch-black skin. I saw a man smiling at me. He had long dark hair that flowed in a light breeze, and tanned skin that drank all the light around him. He walked into the shroud of trees, not looking back. I stood and watched until I could no longer see him. I kept walking until I saw the rock. The same dark figure was standing on top of it. At the foot of the rock was a small beachhead and a massive pond that seemed to glow. The ominous silhouette pointed to the sky, and as if on cue, out of the ethereal plane came the Thunderbird. Silently flying overhead, its wings pushing down this thick, cool breeze. While looking up and admiring the mystical bird, I heard a splash from behind me. I whipped around and the figure had jumped into the pond, swimming around. They came closer, and shape began to take form of this entity. It was a woman. She was dressed in some tribal garb, but she was covered in the chest by this massive necklace of beads and bones. She came closer, then as if she was in my head, began to speak to me. "You have come far to get here. You may go back now." I blinked in disbelief in her words, and with a couple more blinks, she was gone. I looked up, and the sky lit up as if the stars were light bulbs, and they just turned on. It became too bright to keep my eyes open, so I shut them like a vice grip. I finally opened them and found myself back at the trailhead. I looked down at my bare hands holding the map, down to my watch. Only 6:53 a.m., I thought to myself. I pulled out my phone and saw that it was the same day and time I began my journey. I dropped the map and turned around, starting towards the parking lot. The ranger sat outside on the chair and tipped his hat to me. Staring down, he said, "Wise choice, son. Wise choice." I turned back around to get in my car. I reached into my center console and pulled out half a smoke joint. I lit up and took a deep drag that sent my soul and mind astral traveling. It was funny. After all, the only thing I could do was look at myself in the mirror and smile.